Hi, good evening, everyone. It is said that of all things Catholic, there is nothing so familiar as the Mass. True? Well, tonight I will be reading something which I have been reading, the Lamb's Supper, the Mass as Heaven on Earth. My partner reading to a book that I have just completed, and that is Hail Holy Queen, also by Dr. Scott Hahn. So this book, The Lamb's Supper, The Mass as Heaven on Earth, also by Dr. Scott Hahn, will be the focus of my readings now and the subsequent editions or episodes for this reading on Storytelling Live. I love this group, Storytelling Live. Hi, Chappie. In a few hours, it will be the feast of Corpus Christi. I wish you all, I pray with you all for a happy feast, a happy and very meditative prayer time for the feast of Corpus Christi. So we are on target. I shall be reading chapter 2 of part 2. In the previous episodes for this book, I have just said, or I said, that there are 3 parts. The first part being the gift of the Mass, part 2, the second part, the revelation of heaven, and part 3, the revelation for the Masses. We are on part 2, the middle. So, chapter 2, part 2. Okay, I'm not on the page, so stay with me. Part 2. Who's who in heaven? Revelation's cast of thousands. Except for a plague of Antichrist flicks in the 1970s, Hollywood hasn't even tried to screen an apocalypse, as it has the Gospels and the book of Exodus. Perhaps some things are just too strange, bloody, violent, and extravagant, even for Hollywood. Or maybe directors are put off by the casting that Revelation would demand, not to mention the cost of special effects. Cecil B. DeMille could content himself with a cast of thousands in the 10 Commandments. You have seen that. Revelation, though, would require literally hundreds of thousands. It is perhaps the most populous book of the Bible. Who are these characters that fill the landscapes and heavenscapes of John? In this chapter, we'll try to get to know them a little better. But first, a confession. I fear to tread here. Perhaps no subject more fascinates or obsesses Revelation scholars, preachers, and hobbyists than the identification of the book's beasts, critters, angels, and people. A reader's identification of these characters depends largely on his scheme of interpretation. The futurist scheme has inspired interpreters to identify the beasts in turn with Napoleon, Bismarck, Hitler, and Stalin, among others. The preterist view, which emphasizes a first-century fulfillment of Revelation's prophecies, tends to identify the beasts, for example, with one or another Roman emperor, or with Rome itself, or with Jerusalem. A third perspective, sometimes called the idealist, sees Revelation as an allegory of the spiritual warfare that every believer must fight. Yet another view, the historicist, holds that the apocalypse lays out God's master plan for history, from beginning to end. Which view do I follow? Well, all of them. There's no reason they cannot tell, or they can't all be true simultaneously. Scripture's riches are boundless. The earliest Christians taught that the sacred text operates on 4 levels, and all of those levels, all at once, teach God's one truth, like a symphony. If I favor one perspective over the others, it is the preterist. Yet again, I won't discount the others. What binds them all together is what binds us all to Christ, the new covenant, sealed and renewed by the Eucharistic liturgy. For within the Apocalypse emerges a pattern of covenant, fall, judgment, and redemption. And this pattern does describe a particular period of history, but it also describes every period of history and all of history, as well as the course of life for each and every one of us. Subtopic: I, John. I mentioned earlier that there is much controversy over John's authorship of the book of Revelation. That debate, while fascinating, is only incidental to our study of the Mass and the Apocalypse. One thing, however, is clear. The text explicitly associates itself with John from Revelation 1 verse 4 and 9 and Revelation 22 verse 8. And John, in the New Testament and in the minds of the early church fathers, means John the Apostle. Indeed, the books themselves indicate that if they do not share a common author, they at least flow from the same school of thought. For Revelation and the fourth Gospel share many theological concerns. Both books reveal a rather precise knowledge of the Jerusalem temple and its rituals. Both seem preoccupied with presenting Jesus as the Lamb, the sacrifice of the new Passover. See John 1 verse 29, 36, and Revelation 5 verse 6. Moreover, John's Gospel and the Apocalypse share some terminology that within the New Testament is peculiar only to them. For example, only the fourth Gospel and the Apocalypse refer to Jesus as the Word of God, from John 1 verse 1 and Revelation 19 verse 13. And only these two books refer to New Covenant worship as in the Spirit, from John 4 verse 23 and Revelation 1 verse 10. Also, only these two books speak of salvation in terms of living water, from John 4 verse 13 and Revelation 21 verse 6. There are many other parallels as well. Still, this identification of the author John with the Apostle John is important only because of the insight it gives us into the power of Revelation's vision. In the Gospel, for example, John is identified as the beloved disciple of Jesus. See John 13 verse 23, 21 verse 20, and 24. John was the apostle on most intimate terms with the Lord, the disciple who was literally closest to his heart. John reclined on Jesus' breast at the Last Supper. Yet in the Apocalypse, when he saw Jesus in his power and glory, with universal dominion and divine sovereignty, John fell on his face. See Revelation 1, verse 17. These are important details for us who want to be beloved disciples today. While we must strive for an increasingly intimate relationship with Jesus, we can hardly begin the conversation until we see Jesus for who he is in his all-surpassing holiness. John's identity is important also in relation to Revelation's earthly concerns. Tradition identifies the Apostle John as Bishop of Ephesus, one of the 7 churches addressed in Revelation. The churches are identified with cities, all 7 of which were located within a 50-mile radius in Asia Minor, probably marking off the sphere of John's authority. We can see why John, as bishop, would be chosen to deliver such a pastoral message as we find in Revelation, especially in the letters to the 7 churches, Revelation 2 and 3. Subtitle: The Lamb. This is Revelation's favored title and image for Jesus Christ. Yes, he is ruler. 1 verse 5. He stands amid the menorah, robed as high priest. 1 verse 13. He is the first and the last. 1 verse 17. The Holy One. 3 verse 7. Lord of Lords and King of Kings. 17 verse 14. But overwhelmingly, Jesus is the Lamb. The Lamb, according to the Catechism of the Catholic Church, is Christ crucified and risen, the one high priest of the true sanctuary, the same one who offers and is offered, who gives and is given. Number 1137. When John first sees the Lamb, he is actually looking for a lion. No one is able to open the seals of the scroll and reveal its contents, and John begins to weep. Then an elder reassures him, "Weep not. Lo, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has conquered, so that he can open the scroll and its 7 seals." From Revelation 5, verse 5. John looks around for the Lion of Judah, but instead sees a lamb. Lambs are not very mighty to begin with, and this one is standing as though it had been slain. From Revelation 5, verse 6. We don't need to revisit here all that we discussed in chapter 2. What should be clear is that Jesus here is a sacrificial lamb, like the Passover lamb. The elders, or presbyteroi, priests, then sing that Christ's sacrifice has enabled him to break the seals of the scroll, the Old Testament. Worthy are you to take the scroll and to open its seals, for you were slain, and by your blood you ransomed men for God. 5 verse 9. Heaven and earth then give glory to Jesus as to God. To him who sits upon the throne and to the Lamb be blessing and honor and glory and might forever and ever. And the elders fell down and worshipped. From 5 verses 13 to 14. The Lamb is Jesus. The Lamb is also a Son of Man, robed as a high priest. From verse 1 verse 13. The Lamb is sacrificial victim. The Lamb is God. That's all for tonight. Thank you for listening. Happy feasts of the Corpus Christi. Be blessed, stay well, and God bless. Thank you.